Power has changed hands in Washington this year, and now Congressman Chris Pappas finds himself in the minority party. But he's still working to get things done, and oddly enough, one of the biggest battles right now is within his own party. We'll talk about that. But Congressman Pappas is our guest this morning, and thanks for joining us here on Close Up.
Good to be with you, Adam.
So, first off, you're the least senior member of the delegation, right? So this doesn't entirely fall on your shoulders, this primary situation with the DNC. But it has to be said, this was a pretty epic fail on behalf of the Democrats in Washington in terms of not just losing the primary, but getting totally blindsided by the White House. How did this happen?
Well, the New Hampshire primary is part of who we are in New Hampshire. It helps define the kind of democracy, the direct democracy that we have that still flourishes today in New Hampshire, the engagement that we get from voters. And what happened with the DNC was a total betrayal by Joe Biden. We were not necessarily anticipating the president to come forward with a plan to reorder the primary calendar. He's someone who has campaigned here, who understands the value that New Hampshire adds to the presidential nominating calendar. And it's a big disappointment that he decided to push the DNC to make these changes. Of course, we are not done yet fighting, and we do have an important card to play in terms of scheduling our primary first in the nation where it belongs. The fact is, New Hampshire doesn't choose for the rest of the country. New Hampshire helps set the tone and helps set the parameters of the conversation in a way that makes for better nominees and better presidents. That's our track record. That's something we're going to continue to defend, and I know that we can count on our Secretary of State to abide by our state law. The fact is, we're going to continue to invite candidates to come to New Hampshire. We're going to make sure that voters are engaging in this process. This is a process that is bigger than any one president, and that's why it's disappointing to see Joe Biden making this political move to put other states in front of New Hampshire when he knows full well that New Hampshire adds value, makes a difference, and is part of a diverse set of early states that we should be maintaining for the DNC.
It doesn't really seem to be in your political character or that of the delegation to really fly off the handle or start pounding the table about this, but do you think that might be part of the problem, that the White House sized the four of you up and said, well, none of these people are really going to get in our way on this, we'll just roll them?
I don't know that that was part of his calculation. I think what he was looking at was trying to create a calendar that was as easy as possible for him should he choose to run for re-election. He obviously was saved by the South Carolina primary the last time around, and so he's recommended putting South Carolina first in front of New Hampshire and dispensing with the Iowa caucuses altogether. But the fact is, no one president or political leader should be shaping this calendar. This is, after all, a primary that's open to people of all political parties. It's Republicans, Independents, and Democrats voting on the same day. That's exactly what we're going to do in 2024, regardless of whether Joe Biden runs for president again.
The DNC has designed these punitive damages, in particular for the New Hampshire Democratic Party, if the state decides to go ahead with the first-in-the-nation primary, which it will. Certainly some DNC members seem to be almost giddy at the prospect of trying to really hammer New Hampshire on this if indeed the state does go forward, which it will, with the primary. Does your relationship with the DNC change at all if they really start to try to harm the New Hampshire Democratic Party?
Well, I don't think that's wise. This is a swing state after all, and the Democratic Party here is strong, has a good track record of winning tough races for Congress, for Senate, just in the last cycle. And so it would be really short-sighted and foolish of the DNC to punish New Hampshire or to do anything that would disrupt the progress that we're making, connecting with voters, building coalitions, and winning tough races here in the Granite State. After all, whoever the Democratic nominee is, if it's Joe Biden again, they're going to need the 4 electoral votes from New Hampshire, which have proven pivotal in past presidential races. And so I think it's important that we look at winning elections, and the way we do that is by supporting efforts in states like New Hampshire of Democrats to organize, to have a strong functioning state party, and what has been done with the primary calendar from the DNC only undermines that.
Let's get back to Capitol Hill, and the Treasury Department is taking what it calls extraordinary measures to continue paying the bills to the United States as the debt ceiling issue extends on. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said basically she has until, or you have until June 5th to do something about the debt ceiling, and after that things could go a little sideways. What is your level of confidence in the ability of Speaker McCarthy to get something across the finish line in Congress? And is there any kind of compromise out there? Because you know that your Republican colleagues are going to be calling for really deep spending cuts.
Well, I don't have a great deal of confidence in Speaker McCarthy's abilities, but I do have great confidence in members of both parties in the House and Senate coming together and finding a solution to this. This is an issue that has been pretty mundane, has been dealt with pretty easily during past years. There have been some negotiations that resulted in commissions and recommended savings to the budget in past years. And I think this is an opportunity for us to look under the hood in terms of fiscal responsibility and how the government needs to be working to reduce the deficit. But we certainly shouldn't be doing that by holding hostage Social Security and Medicare and cutting vital programs that people here in New Hampshire depend on. And we shouldn't be jeopardizing the full faith and credit of the United States of America. That could unleash a global economic catastrophe that would cost millions of jobs right here in the United States, would disrupt people's retirement savings, would really hurt working families in particular in New Hampshire. So that is a bridge too far, I think, for most of my colleagues, including those across the aisle that I've been talking to. I'm part of a bipartisan problem solvers caucus. We're made up of half Republicans and half Democrats. We've got a task force that's been formed on this very issue. And I think if there's a solution to be had in the short term, before we hit that June date, it's going to be by members talking to each other and figuring out how we can get this done.
This train derailment in Ohio and the resulting, toxic airborne event that happened there really seems to have touched a nerve. Do you think it was a mistake for Secretary Buttigieg to wait so long to get on the ground there?
Well, I think he probably should have been there much earlier. I do know that the Department of Transportation and EPA and NTSB were on the ground immediately after this derailment, as they should have been. And it's really important to look at what should be done next. I'm on the House Transportation Committee, and we know that for a long period of time, corporations have been looking to water down regulations, reduce the size of crews on trains, lengthen the number of cars that can be added to trains, and by doing so jeopardize public safety. There are some real serious issues that need to be addressed that will protect the environment and public safety moving forward, including increasing fines for these companies when they're violating public safety guidelines, including two-man crews for all trains, including regulations around the transportation of toxic substances. So those are things that we can work on in a collaborative and bipartisan manner. But absolutely, any sort of incident like this that happens, the administration needs to be on the ground immediately. I do think that federal agencies were there, and I do think that there perhaps can be lessons learned about how to communicate with a community when something like this happens.
Let's talk about the war in Ukraine. 1 year in now, and President Biden obviously showing a very deep commitment to Ukraine by going there and also speaking in Poland about the commitment of the United States. Vladimir Putin's best play at the moment maybe to try to stretch this out and get a stalemate going here. Do you worry, I guess, the United States commitment that it has to be years and years and years? Are we in this for the longest possible haul here with a blank check?
Well, it's not a blank check, but it is solidarity with the people of Ukraine who are fighting for their country. We're at the 1 year mark now. We have seen thousands of Ukrainian citizens lose their lives because they've been targeted indiscriminately by the tyrannical regime of Vladimir Putin. And what he is doing in Ukraine can't allow to be successful here because we know he won't stop there. So I've been encouraged by the way the West has stood together. We have strengthened the NATO alliance as a result of this invasion. Certainly, there's been significant funding that's been approved through Congress that I've supported, that's gone to support the Ukrainian military to get them the weapons systems and defensive weapons that they need. More needs to be done to expedite that, by the way, and I think if the administration can do one thing, it's when systems are approved to be disseminated to Ukraine, let's get those there as quickly as possible. Let's make sure the Ukrainian military is trained up as efficiently as possible, and let's make sure we continue to urge other nations in our alliance to provide the kind of humanitarian and economic support that will make a difference. The fact that they've made it to this 1 year mark is remarkable, when many folks thought that within hours or days Kyiv would have fallen to the Russians and we'd see a puppet government installed. That didn't happen, and so we should celebrate the resiliency of the Ukrainian people and take every step possible to make sure they can be successful. It's not open-ended, it's not a blank check. It has to be informed by what's happening on the ground, and certainly we want to see a free Ukraine and allow those people to live peacefully.
Closer to home here, your hometown of Manchester is going through a lot of stuff right now in terms of homelessness, and there's also gun violence issues the police are dealing with. Some of these problems, including the homeless issue, seem to be a bit bigger than the city. So do you think there's more of a state responsibility here, or does the city need to step up and do more?
Well, I think all parties need to do their job, and we've seen significant engagement between the city and local service agencies to help increase capacity of beds and warming shelters through these tough winter months. I do think that the state needs to recognize that this can't fall squarely on the shoulders of Manchester to solve alone. This is a statewide and a national problem, and we need a whole of government response. And we have to recognize that in New Hampshire, many of the services are located in Manchester, and so much of the burden does fall on this city, so it needs to be a stronger partnership. We'll continue to work at the federal level to make sure that these agencies and that the city has whatever funding we can secure to help address this problem. And it also speaks to the longstanding need to develop more affordable workforce housing in places like Manchester and across our state. Federal incentives can be quite pivotal at bringing about that kind of development, but again, this is cooperation that's needed across levels of government.
You were at the State House this last week, firing up the troops there, the Democrats in the House. Some people have been wondering if you might have your eyes on maybe running for governor in 2024. Is that a job you would be interested in?
Well, it's certainly an important job for the people of New Hampshire. I've seen it up close as an executive counselor, and I was pleased to join members of the House Democratic Caucus, which is the largest minority that we have seen in the State House, I think, in history. And I think they're set to be able to make a difference and pass some important pieces of legislation, perhaps stop some bad things from happening. We just got through an election. I've got a job to do for 2 years. I'm really committed to doing it. I've picked up a third committee, the Small Business Committee, that I'll be serving on in addition to Veterans and Transportation. And even in a divided Washington with Republican control, I think I'll be able to pass bills and make things happen for the people of New Hampshire. And as I consider additional opportunities in the future, it will always be through the lens of where can I make a difference? How can I make this state a better place to live? So that's certainly something I'll consider, and I'm sure people will be talking to me about it.
All right, Congressman Chris Pappas, we will watch this space. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Adam.
Appreciate your time.